Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that you're all here. Kamil, how excited are we?
I'm too excited that I'm afraid I'm going to say something stupid.
Don't worry, I'll say all the stupid things for both of us. So I had to pick some great opening music, and who is not obsessed with that Kate Bush song? I absolutely love it. I'm like so excited it's back. I almost forgot all about it. So it felt like the appropriate song, although it might date this video a little bit. People might look at it and be like, oh, that must have been 2022 when Kate Bush came back in. All right, so we're waiting for some more folks, but you know what? What we'll do in the interim, we're expecting, 300 people signed up. Hopefully half of those might make it. Anybody who's hosted a webinar knows that sometimes people sign up with the best of intentions of wanting to be there, and then something happens, the day gets away with them. So we'll give just a minute or so for people to arrive. But what I will say is that today is going to be super fun. We're going to be sharing 6 brainy hacks specifically for B2B advertisers. And at the end, there's gonna be an opportunity for you to do a Q&A with Kamil, get advice from an amazing advertiser that you can apply to the business that you work for or for your own business. So lots of juicy stuff going to happen. What I will say is whether you've been working in, advertising for years yourself, or you're just about to get started in ads and you want to make sure you're doing it right, I promise you're going to walk away with something of value in today's session. So when Kamil and I sat down and we chatted about this, what we knew we wanted was we wanted one goal for this session. And that was, we want you to leave here a little bit smarter than when you came in. And most of you are all very, very smart. So that's a pretty big promise, but I do feel confident that we can deliver on that. So who are we? Let's do a quick little introduction. So I'm Katelyn Bourgoin. I'm the CEO of Customer Camp. I'm a total nerd for buyer psychology and customer research. At Customer Camp, we also offer workshops and we have digital products all around helping teams to do something that's really important, but often neglected, and that is understanding their customers. And so Kamil Rextin, he is equally nerdy about using customer insight to drive growth. And he's the founder of 42 Agency. Now they partner with B2B SaaS companies that are ready to scale their demand gen and their marketing and sales ops. So we know a lot and think a lot about what motivates customers to take action and what gets people's attention. And so our goal is to just help you to take some of what we know and apply it to the work that you're doing. So here's how things are going to go down. Hey, Eli, we're going to start by exploring 6 brainy hacks, and I'm going to lead that part. And then at the end, Kamil is going to be available to answer all of your questions. So typically you'd have to pay him a lot for consulting. You get to get some time for free. And it's going to be interactive. So I'm not going to put anyone in the hot seat. Don't worry. I won't make you put your video on and share answers, but I'd love for you to answer in the chat. If there's something, if I ask a question and you have an idea or you want to share, please answer. I'd love to hear from everyone. Okay. So before we get started, 2 really quick things. You're going to learn some pretty powerful stuff. Buyer psychology is powerful stuff, and we expect you to use it for good and not for evil. So the goal is never to manipulate anybody. It is to earn your buyer's attention and to build trust. And so talking about attention and trust, Kamil and his team actually have a really cool framework all about understanding trust and attention. And I read their blog post explaining this a few days ago, and I thought it was just super, super smart. So I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat so that after this, people can go and check that out. If you have questions you want to ask about it in the Q&A, please do. But, it's about getting attention and building trust, never about manipulating. All right. So, and here's a little preview of that so you can kind of get excited about what that might look like. All right. So again, like I said, at the end, you're going to do a Q&A with Kamil. I've got some questions I'm dying to ask him, but if you have questions, especially ones that come up through today's webinar, then make sure that you ask them and he can give you answers. So 42 Agency, they've worked with some really cool clients, a lot of whom you were going to recognize: Smile.io, Knack, Guru, Sin7. This is actually a message from Profitwell CEO Patrick Campbell, who I'm sure many of you know. He's kind of a legend. He took a bootstrapped SaaS and just recently had it acquired for 200 million. And guess who runs ads over at Profitwell? The amazing team from 42. So lots that you can learn from this team. Okay, Let's get into it. We're going to explore 6 brainy hacks that B2B advertisers need to know. And we're also going to look at one very important concept, something that isn't talked about enough, but something I'm working on trying to spread a light on. And then we're going to look at 5 cognitive biases. And if you're wondering what the heck a cognitive bias is, it doesn't sound very fun. I will explain it, and I guarantee you it's actually cooler than you think. All right, so talking about the concept is buying triggers. Now, if you want to create the kind of ads that people actually stop scrolling, knowing who you're targeting is pretty important, right? But knowing when to target them, that is actually really important. So nobody just wakes up one day thinking, I want to buy a new product. Something happens in their life that motivates them to enter the market, to be in the market for a solution. And that's a buying trigger. So a trigger event, it is a moment when your buyer moves from being oblivious that they even have a problem to being in market for a new solution. Let's look at some examples. So they can be situational things like getting engaged or having your dishwasher break or starting a new job. Could be biological stuff like being hungry or cold. Those are biological triggers. Emotional, feeling insecure, feeling depressed, or social, like having a dispute with a coworker, or maybe a friend recommends a product. That can be a social trigger. Now, if you're thinking, okay, like I understand that trigger events happen, but I work in B2B. How is any of this relevant to me? Well, I've got you covered because Sales Rocks actually wrote this amazing blog post outlining 34 different B2B triggers and how you can track them. So these B2B triggers, they're things that you can monitor, like when a company might be increasing hiring, that could be a trigger, or layoffs that are happening in a company, or positive press coverage that a prospect gets, or maybe they're having a bad quarter. All of these could be triggers that are going to move the people in those companies into the buying journey, potentially being interested in what you sell. So once a trigger event occurs, the buyer, they then realize they've got a job to do and the journey begins. But they may not even know that yet. And so if you're looking to spend money on ads, you really want to figure out these buying triggers in advance because it's going to help you to get in front of people at the right time. And why is that important? Well, if there's no trigger event, then there is no purchase. So knowing who to trigger and where they hang out, that isn't enough anymore, right? We can't rely on Google and Facebook and just hope that they're going to figure this all out for us. We need to do this work. We need to understand who might be in market for a solution like ours. And people, we know this because we're good at it too. We're really good at ignoring marketing messages. We're so used to being inundated by marketing that we've developed ad blindness, and we're good at tuning ads out. But guess what people pay attention to? They pay attention to something. Maybe it's not always an ad, but what do people pay attention to? I want to see some answers in the chat here. Anybody have any ideas what people might actually pay attention to? Rose says memes. Very true, Rose, especially today. Love it. Any other ideas? Offers, Melvin says. Social proof. They're problems. Eli, you hit it on the head. What I was going to say. Answers to their problems, right? They're going to pay attention to the things that are answers to problems that they know that they have. So when the trigger event starts, they realize they have something they need to get done. And once they've experienced that trigger event, they're going to begin passively noticing possible solutions, and then they might start actively searching for their options, right? So when they're actively searching, that's when they're in Google searching for things, but they're also this huge amount of opportunity when they're in that passive stage where they may not be searching for a specific result yet, but they are going to notice things if those things are put in front of them. So the buying journey, it's pretty messy. They'll often look at a whole bunch of different solutions before they actively begin looking for one like the one we want to sell. So let's look at an example. Gong calls itself a revenue intelligence platform. So they coined that term. Who has heard of Gong? Anybody heard of Gong? People know about them. Awesome. Okay. So Gong promises to help B2B companies to unlock reality to fuel the revenue engine. So essentially, they capture and analyze customer interactions across multiple channels like sales calls, support tickets, CRM, and they alert you to opportunities. That's all really cool. There is a problem, though, for Gong, and that is most people are not looking for a revenue intelligence platform because people don't know what a revenue intelligence platform is. Gong's doing a pretty good job of changing that, but initially nobody knew what that was. And so Gong needed to figure out, how can we build demand for the thing that we do, while at the same time get customers now, customers who might be able to benefit from a solution like ours, even if they're not looking for it. And so understanding their customers' trigger events allows them to do that. So another quiz. When might a sales leader be triggered to realize that they need more actionable customer insight? So is that another way? What is a specific real world event that may trigger a sales leader to recognize that they have a problem? What might be happening? Rose is saying new goals. I like that. Any other ideas? Any reasons why they aren't converting leads? They lost clients. They're missing their targets. Customer churn. Brilliant answers, right? And so these are some of the ones that came up that I thought of. So maybe they're onboarding and training a new salesperson, and suddenly they need to take what's in their head and put it in somebody else's head. And they're then not 100% sure what's in their head is accurate. Or maybe it's the end of the month or their quarter and they haven't reached their sales quota. Or maybe the sales team is missing their quota. Or maybe they're planning a cold outreach approach and they need to write a sales script. So those are all possible trigger events happening in the real lives of prospective Gong customers that may open them up to being interested in a solution like Gong. So look at this ad. People who are trying to write an effective cold outreach script, they would pay attention to this ad, right? It's something that would draw their attention. Even if they don't know what revenue intelligence is, there's a trigger event in their life and that would make them pay attention to this ad. And what trigger event do you think might get somebody to stop scrolling if they were to see this ad? Answers, I'd love to hear them. What do you think would make somebody stop scrolling if they saw this ad? A trigger event that happened in the organization's life. Any ideas? New hires, crushing sales checks, actionable. So maybe the trigger event is they just hired a new salesperson, right? And they need to onboard them. So now this is because of the way that this ad works. Yes, it's letting people know about the fact that they have a revenue intelligence platform, but it's a specific event that's happening in a prospect's life that might get them to pay attention to that ad. Super smart. So the actionable takeaway here is this. If you discover your customers' buying triggers, you can create ads that can get in front of them sooner in less crowded channels with better messages, ones that they actually pay attention to. And once you have attention, then you can start to try to build that into trust. So the other thing is you're going to save money because you're not going to be wasting as much money on ads that nobody pays attention to. So trigger events are pretty valuable. According to Craig Alias, the author of Trigger Event Selling, marketers who leverage trigger events actually spend 80% less on direct marketing costs. So if you are not thinking about your buyer's trigger events, you might be overspending, and learning what they are pretty helpful. All right, so now we know what trigger events. Let's talk about our next hack. The next hacks we're going to talk about, they're all cognitive biases. Now, again, a cognitive bias, it's a systematic pattern of deviation from the norm or rationality in judgment. That's what Wikipedia says. That's kind of convoluted, so we're going to say it a little simpler. It is a way that people make decisions. It informs our thoughts and actions. So we have to make 35,000 decisions every single day. That's a heck of a lot. And our brains get tired. We're deciding what to have for breakfast, what to wear. Some decisions are really important, and others are not so much. Like others are life and death. Like, should we run out of a burning building or just sit and chill? So our brains have developed shortcuts essentially to allow us to make decisions faster. And Dan Ariely, he is a behavioral scientist. He says our expectations, emotions, social norms, and other invisible, seeming irrational and illogical forces skew our reasoning abilities. So cognitive biases, they explain our skewed reasoning. So there's actually over 150 of these that have been documented by different behavioral economists. You've probably heard of some of them, things like scarcity and confirmation bias. Elon Musk, he tweeted this infographic a while back, and it explains 50 different cognitive biases. And Elon said that understanding these, it's something people should be taught from a very young age. But we do not have time to dig into all 50 of these. We're going to look at 5. But I do want to say that as you go off and start exploring these on your own, what you might find is that a lot of the examples that you'll read about in the companies that are applying this, particularly to marketing, tend to be B2C companies. But this is all relative to B2B brands as well. And why is that? Because your customer's brain doesn't just magically get rewired between the hours of 9 and 5. The stuff that you can use to sell to consumers is the same type of stuff you can use to sell to B2B. The application is different, but it's still the same. So a lot of B2B marketers in particular were not focusing on this stuff. Meanwhile, off in the consumer world, brands are doing this. And what that means is that gives you a chance to really stand out and to create ads that stand out, to create content that stands out, because you understand what actually motivates people and how they think. So our friend here, Seth Godin, he says the 2 scarce elements of our economy are trust and attention. And we know that as marketers. We need to understand how people think if we want to be able to get their attention and earn their trust. So let's explore 5 cognitive biases that can help us with that. The first one, loss aversion. Okay, so anybody who has ever won money knows that that feels good, right? If you, let's say you want to bet with a friend or you won $10 on a scratch ticket. Winning money feels good, but losing money, how does that feel? Well, studies show that losing money is psychologically actually twice as painful as the joy that we get from winning money. So we're loss averse, right? We don't want to experience this pain. We'll actually make kind of irrational decisions to try to avoid pain. And so we're more motivated to avoid losses than we are to achieve equal gains, which isn't rational, but it's human. And let's look at how this can be valuable in the ads. So here's a great Facebook ad from Profitwell, again, a client of 42s. And they start by asking viewers if they're sick of losing customers to cancellations. So this Facebook ad, it triggers the audience's loss aversion, which is very smart. And of course, before you ask, yes, B2B can do Facebook ads as well. Again, your customers are on Facebook. They're not just suit-wearing, spreadsheet-living robots. They hang out on Facebook. And good marketers are going to meet them where they are. So here's another ad. This one comes from Chorus, and this one targets sales managers. And they're tapping into their loss aversion here by showing them what they could lose if they don't become a better sales coach. So they're highlighting the risk of losing team members, and that's tapping into loss aversion. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of the sales leader, maybe they just lost a sales rep, that could be the trigger event. This is going to be a pretty timely ad, one that might make them take action. So the takeaway here. If you want to tap into the prospect's loss aversion, you've got to be able to highlight what is at stake, right? Show them what they could lose by not taking action. Otherwise, it's way too easy to just stick with the status quo. Okay, moving on to Brainy Hack number 3. What are people thinking so far? Are you enjoying some of these? Are any of them new to you? I'd love to hear from people. This time we're going to talk about the framing effect. So I'm going to explain this cognitive bias with a bit of a story. So let's assume that you had just received like your 10th spam email of the day, and you're totally fed up. You're getting so much spam. You decide you're going to fix this problem. You want to go out and find the best spam blocker. And so you go on Google and you search for something, you land on a blog post, and it's comparing different spam blockers. And as you're scrolling down the page, you see an ad. Now, if you were given the option between these 2 ads, which one would be more appealing to you? Ad A or ad B? Which one speaks to you? Which one do you think would be more appealing to you? We're hearing B, 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 B. Love it. Okay, well, you're right, because guess what? Like most people, this one sounds more appealing. The frame is more desirable, but the reality is, logically, if you think about this, they're actually the same, right? They should be the same, but the framing actually changes our perception. So this is what you need to understand. How you say something is often more important than what is said. And in most cases, positive frames work better than negative ones. So let's look at a few examples. So this is a really good Facebook ad from ClickUp. They promise that they're going to save you 1 day of work a week. Now that is a really big promise, and all of us probably wish that that were true. I'm not using ClickUp myself yet, but I've looked at it, and if they can deliver on that, holy shit. But they could have said something differently, right? They could have said that, disorganization in your organization is costing the average worker 480 minutes a week, right? If you work an 8-hour workday, that's the equivalent of 480 minutes, right? And since the average person works an 8-hour workday, these two frames are essentially saying the same thing. And it could be a good framing because it would tap into our loss aversion. But in this case, when you think about it, it's easier for the reader to imagine what they do with a whole extra day a week than to think about where they might be wasting 480 minutes. So this brings us to a very important point. You should be testing multiple versions of your ad, right? Sometimes the message that works, one might be one that plays on loss aversion. It might be the most effective. Other times you might find that changing the frame is actually more effective. And that's what's so beautiful about digital advertising. It is so easy for us to test a variety of different messages and to see what's resonating with buyers. So the takeaway here is you want to frame your offer carefully. Think about how you want to present it, because how you say something is often more important than the actual what is being said. Okay, so we've got another one coming up. We've got 3 out of 6 of our Brainy Hacks have been covered. Next one, social proof. Who has heard of social proof? I think we're going to have everybody's hand go up, right? Everybody knows about social proof. It is not the most revolutionary concept. Most marketers know what it is. And when it comes to purchase decisions, if we see hundreds of 5-star reviews for a product, that's going to give us some proof, some confidence that that is a product that we should check out. And so while I bet you all know what social proof is, I want to show you some nuances to how you can use it in your ads. So let's look at an example. Here's a classic ad from SurveyMonkey, and they've used 2 forms of social proof here. First, they say that 350,000 businesses use SurveyMonkey. That is impressive, right? That's a lot of friggin' businesses. Then they say that it's trusted by 98% of the Fortune 500 companies, and they cite a stat around that. Again, more social proof, more reason to think that it's a good product. And if you actually watch this video ad, they include some testimonials from real buyers, more social proof. This is all good stuff. This is kind of like what you'd classically see, and it's valuable. But here's another one. This is a LinkedIn ad, and this time Float is including a testimonial from a customer. Pretty standard, but they're doing some smart things here. So for one, when using testimonials, it's important that the person viewing your ad can actually relate to the person giving the testimonial. So if you were to say sell to both marketers and salespeople with your product, you might have this really amazing testimonial from a salesperson, but it wouldn't be as useful to show that to a marketer. It'd be better to take a testimonial from a marketer, even if it's not quite as awesome and sexy as the one from the salesperson, and show that one to the marketer. So we like and trust people who look more like us. So relevant testimonials is a good tip. Another thing is they're showing the person's face here, and we are drawn to faces. We can't help it. As humans, our eyes go towards faces. So showing the face of the person giving the testimonial, super smart. And one little thing they do here, which you wouldn't think is a big deal, but some Microsoft research actually showed it was, they're showing the logo from the company. And Microsoft did this study, and they actually found that when you include the logo with the testimonial and not just the name written out, it actually outperforms ads that don't have the logo. So you're losing lots. Oh, hello, Adam, welcome. So these are all some pretty standard social proof things. This one is from ProfitWell. Again, using social proof, but they're doing something really clever here. Anybody have any idea what it is? What are they doing? And 42 team, you can't answer this one because you probably already know. So what are they doing that's really clever here for how they're applying social proof? Any ideas, any guesses? It's a little bit trickier, so people may not notice it. It's kind of quiet and subtle. So I'll tell you what it is. So what they do, adding up, yeah, Tara got it. So they're showing the exact dollar amount of what their buyers have saved. Now, this is really smart, and they could have framed this differently as you learn. So what they could have said here is they could have said that they saved buyers $250K in failed payments. That would have kind of gone on that loss aversion thing. But in this case, they're using the exact number. They're not they're not abbreviating it, and there's a reason. So an exact number feels more believable than a rounded number. So if you're trying to build trust and you're trying to make a number look big, giving the exact number and including commas, even including decimal points in some cases, can make that number look big, which is good. And that brings us to the next point. If you want a number to look bigger, don't abbreviate it and use commas, stretch it out, because then it makes the person think, whoa, that's impressive. So a little tip to do with numbers. I'm actually going to be doing a newsletter all on numbers, because there's so many cool things you can do with numbers. Jason's asking a question around company logos, testimonials. Jason, save that question. We're going to ask that at the end, because that's a great one. And I'd like to get Kamil's thoughts on that as well. So the actual takeaway for the social proof section is you can use social proof and you can let facts, faces, and figures do the selling for you. Anything you say about yourself is okay. What other people say about you, way, way more powerful. All right, moving on. We've got 4 to 6. We're going on to number 5, which is zero price bias, right? We all love free stuff. Why? Because if something is free, then our fear of losing it goes away. So that's why free trials and free ebooks are so popular. But you don't need to wait until somebody lands on the website to trigger their zero price bias. You can meet them where they are online. So the places like LinkedIn, Facebook, in the Google search results, and you can use your ads to actually help them overcome the bias of clicking through to learn more about that offer. So let's look at a few examples. So another ad, this is a Facebook ad from Deere. Deere is an inventory management system and another client of 42's. And in this ad, they leverage the zero price bias by highlighting that they offer a free trial right in the copy and in the imagery. So you can't escape it. Before you click through this ad, you're like, will there be a free trial? That sounds interesting, but I don't know. No, you know right away there's going to be a free trial. And these ads were actually really effective. So 42 helped Deere to reduce their cost per acquisition from $200 to $100. So letting people de-risking that before they had to click through, huge savings for their ad spend. And here's another one from Nzuzo, which is another 42 agency client. Nzuzo helps e-commerce businesses to create, customize, and launch privacy tools, right? So they focus on e-commerce businesses, and these businesses, they need to have these legally required privacy tools, right? They need to be able to say that they want to capture the right information so they can remarket to these folks. And this ad leverages zero risk bias again by promoting that they have a free terms generator. Now, this ad is smart for the fact that it's taking advantage of the zero risk bias, very smart, but it's smart for another big reason. So what might trigger an e-commerce business to go looking for a free terms generator? Any ideas why an e-commerce business might need to get some terms generated that they're going to use? Any idea? New business, Rose, absolutely. Any other responses a little more specific? Contest, Kenny says, not exactly for this one, although I could see maybe that could work. Sales, Eli, new website being made, you hit it. So when you are creating a new website and you're filling out all the sections, there's a little privacy section, right? Shopify allows you to create a privacy section. And you're thinking, I probably need to make sure that I'm protecting myself legally. I should go generate a policy or some terms to legally protect ourselves. So, and Nzuzo knows that, so they can get in front of people at the exact right time. And then they can help to educate them on the other things that they should be doing to protect their business. So the person is in the exact right mindset because they're launching this new website. They want to make sure that they're protecting themselves. A perfect time for Nzuzo to get in front of them, and a really smart way by offering that free terms generator tool. So the takeaway here is that if you use the zero price effect in your ads, you can de-risk the offer before people even have to click through the ad, and it is going to get more people to take action. Other people may have just scrolled right by it, but when you're like, there's no risk, I might as well go check it out. All right, so we've got one left, and this one is probably the most important of all 6, especially when it comes to advertising. Does anybody have a guess before I reveal what it is? Again, 42, you can't answer because you might know. Anybody have a guess? It's a cognitive bias related to advertising. I want to see if anybody has a sense of what it might be. All All right, I'm going to scarcity. Scarcity is a good one. I didn't include that one here though, because I figured most of you knew it. So I wanted to go for something a little bit different. FOMO, another really good one. So you guys know your biases. All right, here's what it is. The mere exposure effect. So simply put, the more we see something, the more we come to like it, the more we come to trust it. So humans, we have evolved to be scared of things that we're not familiar with. So this used to be a good thing back in the hunter-gatherer days when we were in tribes, because like it was like, oh, I've never seen that before. Should I eat it? Or that tribe, are they friendly? Should I go and talk to them? It was an important human trait to have. It's not as important today, but what happens is that now when we see a new thing for the first time, we're skeptical of it by default. And the more we see something, the more we're exposed to it, the more we come to like and trust it. And this is particularly important for B2B advertisers like us to understand, because the B2B buying process is really messy. So let's look at an example. So let's pretend that you sell loyalty software to small businesses like smile.io. So maybe somebody, a small business owner, hears about your product for the first time when they're listening to a podcast. And then maybe they see somebody recommend it in a Facebook group. And then maybe they see a video ad on Facebook and they watch part of that ad. So you know, okay, this is somebody that might be interested, but they don't actually click through to explore the product. So now you can retarget them with additional ads. And maybe they're going to notice these ads. They're going to catch their eye, but they don't actually click on them. And then finally, a trigger event happens in their real life. And they realize, oh my goodness, I might need a solution like this. So maybe a new competitor opens up shop down the street from them and starts stealing all their customers. So now they need a solution. And they're determined to stop losing customers. So they head over to Google and they search for loyalty software for small businesses, right? And they're greeted with ads from brands that they don't recognize. And then they scroll down the page and they see smile.io, the second search result. Maybe the first search result is not a brand that they recognize. Which one do you think they're going to click on? Well, all the studies show that they're going to click on the one that is more familiar to them. So it's really important for us as marketers to realize that it takes multiple touches oftentimes and exposure to our brand before we can build that attention and trust that's going to drive action. So 42 used ads like this one and this one and this one, all for smile.io, and they're smart ads. They take advantage of loss aversion and framing and social proof and other biases that we didn't talk about yet today. But what's important here too is that multiple exposures to the brand, that helps to build trust. So this was pretty great for smile.io. They actually were able to reduce their acquisition cost to only $20. So any of you that are spending money on ads, you might be like, holy snap, if I could get a new customer for $20, that would be the realist. So the important takeaway here, and probably the most important one for advertisers, is when you show up consistently, you can help to build attention and trust over time. And it's going to take multiple touch points, oftentimes across multiple channels, to make buyers trust your brand. So you have to be patient with your advertising. Okay, so let's look at a quick summary of what we covered here today. We talked about buying triggers, understanding your customers' buying triggers and how that can help you to get in front of people sooner in less crowded channels with better offers. We talked about loss aversion, how people are more motivated to avoid losses than they are to get equivalent gains, which is why you must highlight what's at stake for buyers. We talked about the framing effect, how something is presented actually impacts our perception of it and how we have to be very careful how we frame our offers. We talked about zero price bias, how you can use your ads to overcome possible objections and increase your return on ad spend by sharing that up front. And lastly, we talked about the mere exposure effect, why the more we see something, the more we come to trust it, which is why we need to show up consistently. So what would be the major takeaway from today? I want you to think about the fact that small changes to your targeting or ad creative can actually yield pretty big results. So when you learn what makes people tick, you can design smarter ad campaigns. And these are 6 examples of Brainy hacks you can apply to your ads, but there are so many others that you should look into learning and you should be testing. And the specific approach that works for your brand, it's going to depend on all sorts of different factors. And so with that in mind, I want to jump into the Q&A so that you can ask some questions that are relevant to your brand. And I'm sure people have questions you're dying to ask, either Camille or Kamil. And so this is going to be your chance. So think about your questions and pop them in the chat. And as we're doing that, what I will do is I have a question that I'm interested in asking Kamil about myself. And this is one that is a hot topic in the B2B world. So Kamil, what do you think about the question? I'm going to close the Q&A here so that, or close the screen so you can just see Kamil and I on screen. There we go. All right, so Kamil, there's this debate around performance marketing versus brand marketing. And you and I have talked about this before. Like, where do you sit on that conversation? Like, what should people be considering as they're evaluating what's the right fit for them?
Great question. So I think the discussion is always about, is performance, should we do performance or should we do brand? And I think the answer is you need to do both. Might be a cop-out answer. But I think two things to just expand on that. One is you have to look at your time horizons. If your time horizon is, I need to get results within like 3 months, you will heavily index on performance because that's going to get you the short-term results. But if your time horizon is, I need to get results in 3 years, and then you can afford to invest in building a brand because that will give you the more long-term results that you're looking for. Because if nobody knows you exist and who you are, nobody's going to buy your software. It goes back to the exposure effect we talked about.
Mic drop on that.
And then I think it's less about performance versus brand. And I want to give a shout out to Sebastian for the framework for attention and trust, where it's about either we need to get people's attention or we need to build trust. So attention is obviously more biased towards performance because when we get attention, we ask them to take a certain action that ties to a business outcome. But we also want to build trust because nobody's going to buy your software if you're like a sketchy software nobody knows about. So I think it's a false debate in the sense that it has to be one or the other. I think it's more about it's both, but it depends. You index heavily towards one, you lean in on one or the other, depending on what are the outcomes you're driving towards.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I've got other questions for Kamil, but if you have questions, pop them in the chat. We've got one coming in here. We've got a couple. So Eli says, question for both of you. For the topics covered today, could one of you suggest one book worth deep diving into to gain a deeper grasp of these types of concepts? So I can talk about the buyer psychology stuff. Is there an advertising book, Kamil, something that relates to ads?
There's some classic ad books. I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but I can probably drop them in later. But again, it's a lot of this is, I think, Katelyn, you're better qualified to talk about the buyer psychology stuff. But I think if you just go to the old school marketing advertising books, Modern Letters is great. Yeah. That talks a lot about these things. And I think you can, a lot of the modern stuff is picked up from like the old school direct response days. So they used to mail out offers and stuff.
Yes. Which goes back to this idea of like, I think we get so caught up as marketers in like new channels or new, targeting abilities within the ad platforms that we're using. And we get really excited with the technology side of it, which is incredibly important. And it's always changing, which is why it's great to work with a team like yours that actually is following and knows what's possible. But there's things that never change, and that's how people think and buy. And so I think that a lot of people kind of over-index in one area and not in another. And so your team can decide, like, are we going to be the ones that like deeply understand our customers and what motivates them, but maybe we outsource the actual implementation of a lot of our like ad stuff to an organization like 42, or maybe we don't have time to do either of those. We don't have time to think about how to write the best copy or do the best creative, but we know who our customers are, and we want to just put that over into 42 hands and let them help us. So like, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say jobs to be done is a great framework to study because I think a lot of times it's like you're trying to figure out what are the jobs that your customers are hiring your product to do. So I think that's like there's a couple of books on that. Sebastian, maybe you can drop them in the chat, but yeah.
I love jobs to be done. So like I would say for me, the books that I'd say I have a tweet that I can share that has like a bunch of my favorite buyer psychology books, but the ones that I'd say when you're just getting started that are just so powerful is there's obviously Influence by Robert Cialdini. So he actually updated a new version of this, which a lot of people are unaware of. There used to be 6 kind of like core things that had to drive influence, and what he called the tools of persuasion, I think, and they actually added a 7th in the most updated version. So if you haven't read that yet, go and make sure you're buying the newest version. And then the other one that's a really great one, and she's an amazing follow too on LinkedIn, and she's got an incredible podcast, Melina Palmer. She wrote the book, let me see, I've got it here, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. I don't know if you can see that.
It's blurred out, but
so good. And in this, she breaks down, let's see, I think there's like 20 different biases that she breaks down, and she gives examples of what they are, how they can apply to marketing. I've learned so much from listening to her podcast, the Brainy Business podcast, and from her book. She's amazing. And she's a marketer by trade like us, who went off and studied behavioral economics. So she kind of bridges the gap between kind of the science world and the marketing world. And I'm a fanatic for this stuff, but she's actually trained. So I hope that answers your question, Eli. Next question, we have Jason. He says, with B2B, how do you get approval to use personal names, company names, and logos for testimonials? So many companies frown on giving approval. It is tricky. That's not one I'm ready to answer because it's not something I deal with very often. How about you, Kamil?
So for us as an agency, we most of the time build it into our contract when we bring it up on the call that we're gonna use we're gonna do this. I think if you're dealing with smaller business, like medium-sized businesses, they're typically okay. If you're dealing with banks and super enterprise companies, then that's a lot of hoops to follow. But I would say that your sales team, your CS team probably has better relationships. So like lean on them because they have that rapport, they have that relationship with the customer where they can say, hey, blah, 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 we've worked together. Like, I think it's doable. You just have to like be delicate about it, especially for bigger like enterprise financial institutions and stuff.
Right. And to add to that, I guess like it's all, you can be careful how you frame your ask, because if you're framing around like, we want to show the kind of behind the scenes amazing things we did for you, and then your competitors are going to know about them, they're not going to like that. But if you frame it around like, we want to show what a badass product you have and how much people love it, and like you kind of shift your ask and make it about them getting exposure for being awesome, that might be an easier way to get a yes. Let's see here. Brian's asking, could you recommend a resource for learning more about buying triggers? So I will drop a link to that blog post because it's really good. I meant to actually leave a link to that and I screwed up. So one second. B2B buying triggers. And I have a webinar actually where I talk about how to action buying triggers in something I call the trigger technique framework. So I will drop a link to that as well. It's up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And then from a sales perspective, it's not stuff that's super sexy and popular yet. And I'm trying to work on changing that because I think a lot of people don't think enough about the importance of it. But there is a book, Trigger Event Selling by Craig Elias, and that's more on the sales side of things. But again, on the marketing side of things, the way you figure this stuff out, it's by using buyer interviews. Typically you can use surveys as well, but surveys don't typically do as good a job at this, but it's trying to understand what was happening in your buyer's life that triggered them to begin the search for a new solution. And interviews really help you with that because the first answer they give you typically isn't the real answer. And then you need to kind of like dig deeper and go back in time a bit more to get to the real answer. Oh, I also have a Twitter thread about this that's a lot shorter than having to watch a 45-minute webinar. So let me find that. And while I look for that, maybe I'll have the next question we have here. Oh, Choice Factory by Richard Shodden is so good. I also have that sitting on my desk. So next question, Kenny says, heuristics are somewhat related to buying triggers. You can read Thinking Fast and Slow. Yes, Thinking Fast and Slow is so good. Thinking Fast and Slow in a nutshell is this idea that our brains kind of have two modes, one that's automatic and unconscious and one that's deliberate and effortful. And guess what? Our brains are lazy. We don't like thinking hard. So we'll always try to default into the automatic and unconscious one. So that's a great recommendation, Kenny. That's a book people should definitely read. Demand Side Sales, one of the most helpful resources, like obviously written by Bob Mesta. If people have not heard of Bob, he is like one of the creators of Jobs to be Done. And he is a huge inspiration to me and so much of the work that I do today. And his book, again, it's from a sales perspective, but it's so relevant, even if you're not a salesperson or you don't consider yourself to be a salesperson. But at the end of the day, we're all really in sales in some format. It's so, so good. And this is my thread on the trigger technique. So another question I had for you, Kamil, is like knowing how.
Tara had a question and got skipped over. I just don't know. Hey Tara, I don't know. Can you speak to targeting a bit specific, like sales team is growing, hiring? Are we using a tool for that? So Tara, hello. She's a friend of mine. So we're using LeadShift, which is based out of Halifax. Actually,
I work with them. I know them.
They're super great. And we're also piloting it out Primer right now, which is aggregates data from different sources like built with and all that stuff, and open titles and open roles. So sort of using a mix of both right now.
Awesome. Yeah. Like and in the Sales Rocks blog post, they give a bunch of tips about how to target some of those trigger events too. You can set up Google alerts. They don't always work, but depending on, if you're doing account-based marketing, you can look like that can be really helpful. Like if somebody's mentioning Crunchbase, like chances are they did a raise if you know who you're targeting. So there's so many little things you can do.
Honestly, like I've even done, Tara, this might be helpful. It's a hacky way. Just hire somebody on Upwork and have them like scour open roles from the company's LinkedIn page and just like build a list of that way.
Genius idea. So Catherine has a question. She says, what is the best way to find out your customers' buying triggers when you're early in your company's journey? Read, I'm the first marketer and all leads are so far have come from press. The company has gone in very limited. So what I would say, also very limited and not easily replicated new markets. So Catherine, what I would say is, again, like my default is to focus on customer interviews initially, because you're going to learn things you can't get through other methods. But you can also, like if your buyers tend to hang out in places, so let's say that they hang out in particular like subreddits, or maybe there's a Facebook group that they chill out in, or like if there's a place where you can get in front of and be listening to conversations that are happening there, you can sometimes find things that way too. So if you only have a few people to talk to, you can always look and try to see where they're already having conversations and insert yourself into those conversations or be a fly on the wall and listen. Also, if you have competitors, even if you don't think of them as direct competitors, maybe you're the only software that does it the exact way you do it. But maybe there's other solutions that people are using to solve a similar problem. What I would do is I would go and do review mining, which means go and read the reviews that customers have written about those products and look to see if they are giving tips there around. Oftentimes people will say like, we were struggling with X. That X might be a trigger that actually push them into the buying journey. So the most effective way, even though it takes a little bit of effort, is usually interviews, but there's other ways as well. Would you want to add anything to that, Kamil?
Social listening. People are probably talking about their problems on Twitter, LinkedIn. Just run an advanced search on Twitter and see what you can find. Like we had one instance where there was a new fintech. It was I don't remember who it was, but this new like Mercury Bank or somebody like that closed down, and our customer was Relay, and we were working with them, and there was like a bunch of people complaining about their issues with the competitor, and we could mine all those data off like Twitter and just like use that in our messaging.
I love that. I love that. And if you're looking for a social listening tool, if you're kind of budget conscious, you can use TalkWalker alerts for free, and you can set up alerts with TalkWalker for specific keywords, and it will look at blogs, but it will also look at Twitter. I got an alert the other day for my name. I was mentioned in a blog, and I'm pretty sure it was written by AI because it made no sense. It said that I was the founding father of Buyer Camp. I was like, okay, this doesn't seem accurate at all. But it's interesting when you see like, it'll alert you when people are talking about your brand name on Twitter, across social, and it's free. So reading YouTube comments, yes, Kenny, YouTube comments are a rich place to find feedback. Love the thought of review mining. I've got some resources on review mining on my site, Misty, if you're interested in those. Any other questions today? Like, are there, I guess, Kamil, one thing I would ask you, thinking from the client side, if I were to hire an organization like 42, what should I know before I come in to make sure that we have a really successful situation working together?
Good question. I think if you have a clear positioning and messaging strategy in place and you have a product marketing person and some marketing leadership, I think it helps, because as an external agency, it's very hard for us to go in and do that. That's not the part. There are people who do that. And they figure out your jobs to be done for the customer, figure out your messaging, your positioning. But for us, we come in after all that stuff is done. So you have a couple of customers in the bag, you have a business strategy that somebody's heading up internally, and you have product marketing, content, whatever resources. And we sort of help come in and help you scale that versus coming in and helping you discover who your ideal customer is and why they buy. So that stuff needs to be more so done internally or with somebody else. And we sort of come in after the fact.
That makes sense. And we had been talking, maybe it's too early to even talk about it, but last time we chatted, you mentioned something about a messaging sprint. Is that something that we can talk about now, or is it too early?
It's too early. Sebastian is probably the guy who's going to hate me if I sell it too much, but we are partnering with Georgiana and Claire from Elevate.
They are genius, by the way, genius.
Yes. So they're the OGs in the space. So, and we're pretty friendly. So we were talking about it, and we're planning to collaborate on the stuff where if somebody comes to us and they don't have a clear messaging and stuff in place, we're going to offer them in partnership with Georgiana and Claire, a messaging sprint. So they get that foundation in place. It might be a 5-week, 6-week, whatever. We haven't figured out the mechanics of it, because a lot of that foundational pieces then informs our ad strategy, targeting, copy, landing pages, design, social proof, all that stuff comes in after. So we're working out the things on that, but that's something we're working on together.
I love this. And I think that anybody who is nerdy about jobs to be done, this is a really good example of, you might think that your job is, we need to get our ads performing better. And so you go and you hire a ads agency that isn't as honest as 42. And they say, yeah, sure, we'll spend your money. And they drop lots of money on things that aren't working because your messaging is mushy. You don't really know who your customers are. You don't have a clear positioning. And then you get frustrated. You go, ads don't work. And the reality is ads work amazingly well when you figure those other things out first. So it's really clever of Forget the Funnel and 42 to team up on this, because people want to understand their messaging so they can have better ads, and people want to have better ads and need to understand their messaging first. So it's a really smart collaboration. Kenny has a question. He said, and you pay for assistance on Fiverr if you want someone else to do the manual work. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of work when it comes to customer research that while you could do it yourself, you're not going to necessarily hurt your ability to learn if you don't. So one thing that I'll do with my review mining system that I teach people how to do this, essentially, you can go out and you can hire somebody, you can outsource the kind of like tedious parts, the parts that your lazy brain doesn't want to do, like going and sourcing and finding all of the reviews and going through and doing the initial kind of categorization of them. So like I use this framework where you kind of categorize them. What's a trigger? What's a pain? What's a goal? And then you can go in after that work has been done, and then you can actually analyze it and start noticing all the patterns and extracting insights. So that can save you a lot of effort. And there's people who they love that type of work. They're really good at it. And so you don't always have to think you have to do all this yourself, or that if you don't have time to do it, look at bringing in somebody from Fiverr who can help. Awesome. I guess the last question I'd have for you, Kamil, is we talk about how, channels are always changing, people say the same, but like, it is cool when you can get into a channel early, because you often get an advantage being in a channel early. And so like, are there any channels or any maybe types of ads that you're excited about that could be opportunities for people who might want to do something different and risky?
We're playing around with some stuff for 42 Slash, which is our newsletter. We've been playing around with TikTok because the CPMs are insanely low. We've been playing around with Twitter ads more for B2B brands. Reddit is interesting because even though it can be kind of a dumpster fire in some cases, there's niche communities that you can tap into, and you can do Reddit ads to niche communities and like based on keywords. The other stuff we're doing is, actually Daniela is doing some of this right now, is we use SparkToro to just do some audience research on where are they hanging out, what they're listening to, and we potentially do some direct media buys with like, your newsletter is a perfect example, like, buying a slot on the newsletter or something like that. But
awesome.
I don't want to encourage people to chase TikTok ads for B2B because I don't like, but there'll
always be people who will tell you, you should do this. And the answer is usually, it depends.
It's always,
The people who tell you it depends are the people you should trust. The people
Yeah.
who tell you you should do it this way are probably trying to sell you their solution to do it that way. So Missy says, as part of my team onboarding, I have them interview 10 clients to understand their market and our clients' pain points. I love that, Misty, that you are doing it right. That makes me so happy to hear that. So knowing that we've kept you a little bit longer than we promised, we said we'd do this in 45. You've been here for almost an hour. Thank you to everybody who stayed till the end. Thank you for Kamil and his team for the amazing insights and for sharing your ad examples so that I could show some really awesome examples and actually have the data behind them to say these are how they're performing. Because sometimes you can look at campaigns and you're like, this is really smart, but you don't know if it's working. Right now we know these are things that are working. So thank you all so much for coming. The replay of this will be up on YouTube, on the Customer Camp YouTube. I'll also be sharing with the 42 team so they can post it as well. And so if there's other people on your team that you need to convince that they should be doing things a little bit differently, make sure to send them a link to this. And if you have any other questions for me and Kamil, please shout out. I'm active on Twitter. Kamil, you are too. Do you want to drop your...
Yeah. I'll drop my Twitter handle.
I'll drop mine too. So mine's K4. That's me on Twitter. And we're there. So any questions you have after this, please connect with us and have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.